Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to drift quietly into the walled courtyards of a palace where voices are hushed, sandals glide instead of walk, and young girls bow more often than they breathe. The year is 1919. Japan has emerged victorious from World War I. Western fashions flirt with Tokyo's alleyways, but the imperial household is still stitched into a different century. And somewhere in that palace maze, decorated with silence and obligation, is a teenage girl with perfect posture and no real say in her own future. You might not survive being chosen as a royal consort before you're old enough to order a tea set. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it on your side of the world? Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get this story started tonight. They called her Nagako Kuni, daughter of a prince, descendant of an emperor, and a pawn on a lacquered chessboard long before she learned how to fake a smile. She was born in 1903, quietly, elegantly, and most importantly, correctly. Her bloodline was impeccable, her demeanor unthreatening, and her ears appropriately sized. Yes, you heard right. There are archival notes about her ears, how their shape would flatter or distract from the emperor's famously angular jaw. Imagine your future hinging on earlobe geometry. By the time she turned 14, the matchmaking process had already begun. Not for her. Oh no. The imperial court was choosing a bride for the Crown Prince Hirohito, a boy so shy he probably hadn't looked a woman in the eye since birth. Candidates were scrutinized like auction pieces, family trees pruned, teeth examined, political allegiances whispered behind fans. It was said that Hirohito's own mother objected to Nagako because of alleged mental illness in her extended family. What she really feared, historians still debate, was it hereditary instability, or just that Nagako wasn't manipulatable enough? No matter. The elders decided. Nagako would be crown princess. The announcement was made in 1919. Nagako, 17 and soft-voiced, moved into the newly built East Palace. Her wedding was a pageant of ancient rituals and uncomfortable silences. She wore 12 layers of silk in an outfit that weighed almost as much as she did. Each color had symbolic meaning. None of them meant help, and help she needed. The imperial household wasn't a home, it was a performance. Servants recorded everything. Meals were taken alone. Letters were filtered. One unorthodox fact: she wasn't allowed to raise her own children. Not immediately. The first 3 years of a prince or princess's life were considered too critical to leave to someone so emotional. Imagine giving birth and then being told, "Thank you, Her Majesty, we'll take it from here." Despite the robotic environment, Nagako had one job that truly mattered: producing a male heir. And boy, did she try. The poor woman gave birth to 7 children, including 2 miscarriages and a stillbirth. Every time she delivered a girl, the silence at court grew heavier. By the time she finally bore a son, Akihito, in 1933, it felt like someone had unclenched their teeth after a 14-year grind. She had done it. She had become empress. And yet she didn't seem to speak. She was crowned Kōjun, a name meaning fragrant purity, kind of like naming someone air freshener. She smiled. She bowed. She did not speak publicly, not once in her entire reign. Some say she didn't need to. Her role was ceremonial, decorative, but in a palace built on protocol and hidden daggers, silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. And Nagako, Kōjun, became the still lake upon which Japan projected its most complicated reflections. The drums got louder, not metaphorically, actual drums, parades, military marches, because as Nagako settled into her role as Empress Kōjun, Japan was setting itself on fire, slowly and with great precision. And she, as the official mother of the nation, was expected to smile through every spark. It was the 1930s now. Tokyo was dressed in red and gold, draped in victory banners and imperial flags. Japan was devouring Manchuria, flirting with fascism, and making ominous friends in Germany and Italy. And in the middle of it all was Empress Kōjun, gliding through ceremonies like a silk-wrapped ghost, saying nothing, doing everything expected, and never once betraying a thought. It's said that while Emperor Hirohito obsessed over marine biology, Kōjun obsessed over protocol. She was a master of doing nothing the wrong way. There's a photo from this period, maybe you've seen it, where she's sitting slightly behind the emperor, hands folded, eyes downcast, a picture of obedience. But if you zoom in, you'll see her heels are digging into the floor like anchors. Just a woman trying not to float away. She attended wartime charity events. She visited hospitals. She accepted bouquets from schoolgirls with missing fathers. And still, no speeches, no interviews, no diary entries that survived. It's one of the weirdest royal silences in modern history. Not even Queen Victoria could shut up for that long. And yet, that silence had its own kind of volume. It filled every empty hallway of the palace. It followed Hirohito to council meetings. And while historians still debate whether she supported Japan's militarism or merely endured it, no one disputes how perfectly she fit into the imperial propaganda. The gentle empress, serene and pure, while Japan marched off to conquer half of Asia. But here's something that didn't make the pamphlets. Kōjun reportedly despised Western influence, not just culturally but physically. She once, allegedly, had every Western-style chair removed from her residence. Her favorite possession? A jade hairpin said to belong to an empress from the Heian period. That's 1,000 years of traditional stubbornness pinned into a single bun. And what was her marriage like? You'd think being married to the emperor would at least come with couples therapy. Nope, theirs was a union of awkward proximity. Hirohito lived in his own suite. He sometimes addressed her through intermediaries. According to palace rumors, yes, we're going there, he spent more time with marine specimens than his own wife. And yet Kōjun never left his side. Not in public. Not when the world began to collapse. By 1937, Japan was at war with China. By 1941, Pearl Harbor was in flames. But inside the palace, time moved differently. Cherry blossoms still bloomed in the garden. Bowing rituals continued. Meals were served in complete silence by servants walking backward. Imagine sipping your soup while the world explodes outside, and all anyone cares about is whether you're holding your spoon at the correct angle. The imperial court was a bubble, one Kōjun had never stepped outside of. She didn't drive. She rarely left palace grounds. She lived in a gilded, ancient world untouched by consequence, or so it seemed. Because just as war darkened Japan's skies, Kōjun remained the constant, impossibly composed, impossibly distant, and maybe, just maybe, secretly terrified. But she wouldn't show it. She had already learned the most dangerous lesson of all. In a palace like this, emotion is more scandalous than treason. Still, there would come a day when silence could no longer shield her. When the fires reached even the quietest gardens. When the emperor would have to speak for the first time, and the empress. Well, she would remain exactly what she'd always been. The shadow behind the throne. The whisper that never came. The elegant absence. The sky over Tokyo was no longer blue. It was black, smudged with ash, streaked with smoke, and humming with the sound of American bombers. And somewhere beneath that sky, in a palace so ornate it looked like it belonged to a different planet, Empress Kōjun was still brushing her hair with a tortoiseshell comb, pretending the empire wasn't burning. It was the summer of 1945. The war was nearly over, though no one dared say it yet. Tokyo had been carpet-bombed into near extinction. Millions had lost their homes. Entire neighborhoods had been flattened in firestorms so hot they fused metal to bone. But inside the imperial palace, reality moved at a different tempo. Windows were sealed, radios were censored, and the Empress of Japan still sipped her morning tea from a cup made in the Meiji era, pinky slightly raised. And yet, despite every effort to insulate her, the war did touch her. Not with flames, but with isolation. By this point, Kōjun had been reduced to a symbol more than a person. A figurine in ceremonial garb, waving from balconies when told, kneeling when expected. Still, historians still debate whether she was truly unaware of Japan's military atrocities abroad, or whether she simply chose not to know. Either way, she was no longer the mother of the nation. She was more like the wallpaper, quietly present, impossible to remove, and oddly comforting during collapse. When the atomic bombs fell, first Hiroshima, then Nagasaki, it wasn't just cities that were destroyed. Japan's myth of invincibility crumbled in real time. But even in that moment, when Hirohito prepared to do the unthinkable, to speak on the radio and surrender, the Empress did what she always did. She stood in the background. August 15th, 1945. The dual-voice broadcast. Millions of citizens gathered around static-filled radios. Some wept, others screamed. The Emperor's voice trembled as he announced Japan's surrender in famously convoluted language. "But Kōjun?" She didn't utter a single syllable. There's no record of where she stood during the speech, no surviving footage. Only one rare photo from that day shows her in profile, expressionless, timeless, utterly unreadable. As if the end of the war was just another appointment on her royal calendar, slotted between flower arranging and silence. One weird fact: the palace was nearly bombed that night. Not by America, but by a Japanese military faction trying to stop the surrender. It was called the Kyūjō incident. Rebel officers stormed the palace, killed several guards, and tried to destroy the surrender recording. Kōjun was reportedly inside the complex during the coup attempt, but again, no word from her. No emotion, just survival, like a silk fan fluttering just out of reach of the flames. When the war ended, the world turned its gaze on Hirohito. He was interrogated by General MacArthur, prodded by Allied investigators, and rebranded into a symbolic emperor, a constitutional mascot with zero power but endless mystique. And Kōjun? She stayed exactly where she was. Still Empress, still silent, still watching from her lacquered shadow box. The Americans called her the Silent Orchid, a nickname that sounds poetic until you realize orchids are carnivorous. They attract, they hypnotize, and then they trap. She began appearing in more staged photos, offering blankets to children, patting orphans on the head, but her eyes, they didn't sparkle. They barely focused. It was like she'd left her body somewhere back in 1940 and never returned. You'd think a woman who survived war, coups, and near obliteration would be lauded, but Kōjun was never quite loved. She was respected, obeyed, feared even. But affection? That was never part of the job description, because being empress in post-war Japan didn't mean evolution. It meant preservation. She became a symbol of the old world, stoic, opaque, and maddeningly consistent. And as Japan rebuilt into skyscrapers and bullet trains, Kōjun stayed in her realm of silks and rituals, untouched by neon or noise. But that wouldn't last. Time has a way of pulling even the most stubborn figures into the present. By 1952, the American occupation had ended. Japan was writing pop songs, rebuilding bridges, and reintroducing itself to the world with a nervous bow. Hirohito, once the living god of an empire, was now just the emperor, stripped of his divinity, left with nothing but an imperial seal and a few good suits. And right beside him, though no one ever really looked, was Kōjun. Same hairstyle, same perfectly folded hands, same ancient silence. It was the beginning of the new Japan, and she didn't change a thing. While Hirohito gave stilted speeches and waved from bulletproof cars, Empress Kōjun glided just behind him like a figure in a painting, unaging, unbending, untouched. You could almost hear her silk robes whispering to the modern world, "No, thank you." She didn't give interviews. She didn't go shopping. She didn't try sushi from a conveyor belt or marvel at a skyscraper. When televisions flooded the market in the 1960s, Kōjun kept her attention on court poetry and flower arrangement. While school children giggled over science fiction comics, Kōjun continued her morning ritual of silent meditation and seasonal incense. And while Akihito, her son, the crown prince, began to fall in love with a commoner, Kōjun tightened the drawstrings around her world. Michiko Shoda was everything Kōjun wasn't. Outspoken, Catholic educated. From a flower empire, not a bloodline. And worst of all, she laughed in public. Kōjun reportedly did not take it well. Her initial response to Akihito's romance was a mix of cold disapproval and quiet sabotage. When the engagement was announced in 1959, Kōjun was so rattled that rumors spread she had collapsed in protest. Whether that actually happened or not, historians still debate, but what did happen is well documented. She made Michiko's palace life a nightmare. For years, Michiko suffered from stress-related health issues. She reportedly lost her voice, literally, not metaphorically, and withdrew from public duties. Meanwhile, Empress Kōjun remained steady as a rock, a slightly cold, unyielding rock, but one with perfect posture. And yet, despite all this, Kōjun's popularity among older generations surged. To many, she was the last proper empress. The embodiment of an ideal that no longer made sense but still felt comforting, like a childhood lullaby or a dusty teacup from your grandmother's cabinet. Here's a weird fact. She once refused to eat canned food, even during food shortages, because it wasn't ceremonially acceptable. She had fresh rice flown in from sacred farms, blessed by Shinto priests. Imagine everyone else eating rationed bread while you're nibbling on divine vegetables. Meanwhile, Hirohito was morphing into a global curiosity. He shook hands with foreign dignitaries, he toured Europe, he even visited Disneyland. Kōjun didn't go. She never flew on a plane in her life. She never left Japan. She didn't need to. The palace was her entire continent, and she ruled it like a ghost with excellent etiquette. But ghosts are only powerful as long as the walls stay up, and the cracks were beginning to show. Michiko was modernizing the image of the Imperial family, speaking softly but directly to the press, appearing more and more like a relatable woman instead of a divine entity. Akihito was redefining what an emperor could be. The public loved it. And Kōjun? She became a symbol of tension, a generation that wouldn't let go, standing in the way of one that couldn't wait to begin. Still, she made no scenes, no statements. She simply persisted, as she always had, with rituals, with structure, with the quiet fury of someone who had mastered the art of losing without looking defeated. There were fewer official appearances. Her figure grew more frail, but never her presence. Every glimpse of her was like spotting a snow-covered shrine in a neon-lit city, oddly out of place, yet eerily dignified. She watched her son take the throne. She watched her rival daughter-in-law become empress. She even lived long enough to see the Heisei era begin. But she didn't change. Not for a moment. She didn't leave dramatically. There were no grand farewells, no poetic final words, no weeping attendants draped over her bedside. That would have been far too undignified. Empress Kōjun, true to form, began to vanish the same way she had lived, quietly, in plain sight, while everyone else was too busy talking about someone else. The 1980s came and went. Japan was in the midst of an economic miracle. Stock markets soared, cassette tapes ruled the world, and teenagers were dancing to American pop music in Harajuku. But inside the Imperial Palace, Kōjun was still seated beneath the same faded screen painted with cranes. She had outlived wars, coups, and entire dynasties of prime ministers. Her children were now elderly. Her husband, Hirohito, had become a softened version of the wartime emperor, still remote, still fond of marine life, but no longer worshipped. When he died in 1989, Japan wept. The nation paused. Historians scrambled. And Kōjun? She didn't speak. Not once. Not even at his funeral. Instead, she withdrew completely from the public eye. Not just symbolically, literally. She moved to a separate residence, deep within the Akasaka estate, away from the main palace. Her name slipped out of daily headlines. She was replaced in memory by new emperors, new empresses, new scandals. People started referring to her not by name but by title, Kotaigo, the Empress Dowager. A term so ancient, it sounds like a riddle. Here's a strange little fact. Even in her final years, Kōjun reportedly continued to supervise the preparation of her meals, personally inspecting rice grains for imperfections. Yes, in her 90s. Because some rituals die slower than people. Those who saw her say she rarely smiled. She wore layers even in summer. She avoided cameras like they were contagious. Once, she was glimpsed shuffling across a garden path in complete silence, flanked by 2 attendants. A child reportedly pointed at her and asked, "Is she real?" No one knew how to answer. Historians still debate whether she suffered from dementia in those final years or was simply retreating by choice, exhausted by a century that had asked far too much of her. After all, by the time she reached her 90s, Empress Kōjun had been a silent fixture through earthquakes, nuclear fallout, and 9 separate Olympic Games. If she wanted to become a ghost, who could blame her? And then, January 16, 2000, she died. No drama, no scandal. Just a short government statement. The Empress Dowager passed away peacefully at the age of 97. Her funeral was quiet, attended by a who's who of global royalty, and yet it felt oddly distant, like saying goodbye to a century, not a woman. Her legacy? Complex, obscured by distance. She never gave a single public speech. No personal memoirs. No handwritten confessions tucked inside a secret box. Just the lingering scent of incense in an empty room, and the sense that something important had just slipped out of reach. Still, there were whispers. That she had been cruel to Michiko until the very end. That she once refused to attend a family event because the food was served Western style. That, in her final moments, she asked for a mirror, not to see her reflection, but to make sure her hairpin was properly aligned. Whether any of that is true doesn't matter anymore, because Empress Kōjun did exactly what she was born to do. She endured. And maybe that's the point. Slow down now. Let your thoughts drift like incense smoke curling up through an open window. This was the story of a woman who said almost nothing for nearly a century, and still left a mark deep enough to echo through marble, silk, and ceremony. Kōjun didn't shape Japan with speeches. She didn't break the rules. She didn't flee the fire. She simply remained. And sometimes that's its own kind of revolution. Think of her now as she was then, gliding softly down a palace hallway, her face unreadable, her steps nearly silent, with 1,000 years of tradition tucked into each breath. She didn't try to belong to our world. She made the world belong to her, just a little bit longer. So breathe a little deeper. Let the lights stay off. Let the quiet settle over your room like snowfall on old stones. Because stories like this aren't meant to end with noise. They're meant to fade, gently, with ceremony. If you ever deviate from your plan, correct yourself before submitting. So, before you drift off completely, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's end the story here. Tonight.